Yeah, Mighty Peter. God, I'm so like, this is close to our hearts. Superheroes, Latinos, superheroes. You've got your comic book going on. I love it.
So
Um, so cool.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
How are you? How's everything?
everything is good. I've been, teaching my film and comics course, and that's all about, a lot of that is about superheroes. In fact, it's all about superheroes, and I'll tell you why. The first time I taught that course, I did the first half where I did superheroes films and their comic kind of partners. And then I switched gears and I did more of the indie alternative comics like Harvey Picard, and then the film version, and then Diary of a Teenage Girl and the film version. And the kids hated it. So, yeah, so I switched and all superheroes. And so, we've got things like Suicide Squad coming up, which, and Justice League, mostly because they're not so good. Yeah.
So let me ask you a couple questions about that. Like, first, in terms of your pedagogy, like, do you read the graphic novels that are the ones that they took the plot from for, say, Suicide Squad? Do you try to do that, or do you go back to like, here's issue one of Suicide Squad? Like, what's the approach on that? And then second question, and then I'll be quiet for a moment. How many comics a week do you read?
Yeah, those are two great questions. So sometimes I do go to the comics, the full comics. In the case where something like Frank Miller's Dark Knight makes sense to have paired with like Chris Nolan's Batman, or the Dark Knight series. And I do that because there's enough there for them to kind of latch onto. The other times where it's a real amalgam, a kind of, smushing together of different sort of moments in that origin comic, and then kind of making this new film thing from it. I just bring in that material for them so we can kind of look at it and see how it's being kind of, stripped down and then reconstructed. So something like Justice League and Suicide Squad, I I bring in the stuff that's being kind of put in the blender and then re-thrown out for the students. But so that's how I work it. Otherwise, it's it's just too much for the students to kind of try to make up all that time.
Sure. I just wonder if, and it's a question for another day and another episode, but I just wonder, because I'm reading right now, someone gave me, I don't know if you can see my background, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a volume, a hardback volume of all the Justice League, Justice Society crossovers starting in the 60s. And it occurred to me when I'm watching the way those frames are drawn and the way the narrative is put out, like it's just be very interesting to me what a college student would think of, this a a very traditional,
Mm-hmm.
here's the layout, there's
Mm-hmm.
narration on the top of a panel, and because it's very different, you know.
Yeah, no, you're right. So yeah, I'm really selective. And then what I will do when I do bring in some of that original material, especially from like Silver Age comics, and put it up on the big screen, is I'll just walk them through, and then show them kind of what elements are being kind of brought into this new space. Um, yeah, and then I also use examples like Ang Lee's Hulk and others to show like trying to impose a comic book storytelling style and layout and everything with the paneling. When you try to impose that into a cinematic space, it just doesn't really work.
Now, how many? And answer my next question, and then I want to ask you about what you just said. But how many comics a week do you read?
So I read probably, right now what I'm plowing through are all the DC teen graphic novels. So the
Huh?
Batman reboot, the Green Lantern, the Shadow of the Batgirl, the Harley Quinn, all of that. So I would
Like,
say I probably read maybe at least two of those a week. Yeah.
okay, great, great. I'm currently getting through the what I just showed you, and also the recent 2 years Marvel Star Wars original comic series. It's very interesting because they've done something that they did when I was a kid with the Star Wars Marvel comics, where all those issues are taking place in and around the events of the movie, which they, of course, they've
Mhm.
done away with that continuity and they've started it anew. And so I'm just reading those just to kind of see those nooks and crannies.
Yeah. I love those nooks and crannies. In fact, they're some of the best. So, speaking of nooks and crannies, you know what's interesting, and I talk about this in the Latinx Superheroes book in the third section, but is these webisode spaces where Latinos are actually like the protagonists of those spaces. And I'm thinking of the Chronicles of Cisco, where Cisco Ramon Vibe gets his own kind of storyline, even if it's, you know, these really quick webisodes.
Yeah.
Yo Yo Rodriguez also, you know, gets her own little story, her offshoot from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you know.
The Blue Beetle short that was included in like the CW Spark, right? Or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Those are spaces that we can almost kind of rely on for us viewers, for us Latinx Latino viewers, seeing the protagonists as having their own story and agency, right? In these little tiny nooks and crannies at the margins.
Question for you about that. Are we drawn to those spaces because they're the ones we're allowed? Are we drawn to those spaces because allowed in terms of pop culture? Are we drawn to those spaces because those are the spaces we're allowed in culture? And should we be excited about that in terms of it reflecting the reality that we live in? Or should we feel like we've been conditioned to accept that as victory?
Yeah, that's really awesome. You know, I think we've been kind of conditioned to accept that as victory. And that's a really nice kind of segue for me to bring us into what I was thinking with Stargirl and
Mm-hmm.
that you know, why at the end I was celebrating the episode 4 and, you know, the introduction of Yolanda Montez, Wildcat, and a Latina playing actually a Latina playing that role.
Mm-hmm.
And super excited that she gets a backstory. And part of that backstory is like a kind of real, like, you know, Me Too impulse, you know, driver where, you know, she's shamed because she sent a sext, you know, to her boyfriend, a picture of herself, you know, half naked. And then it gets redistributed across the school and she's a pariah and all of that. And I was really excited about all these elements, but then I was like, hold on, why isn't Wildcat our star girl? Like, right?
Right. Right. And I mean, and guess what? I mean, that goes all the way back, and I've talked about this with you and Barbara before, like when I was very young and reading comic books before, even deciding I wanted to write television. But, there was the Justice Society as presented to Peter Murrieta as an 11-year-old boy in the reboot of All Star Comics, and all the heroes were old. And that was kind of a draw to me to see Superman with gray hair, to see Green Lantern had become this media overlord. He kind of owned the television and radio stations in Gotham. Alan Scott did, and Wildcat was, Ted Grant was this ex heavyweight champ, and he was sort of the grandfatherly figure of that group, right? Then along comes Infinity Inc., which was its own book, and it was the children and offshoot and nephews and nieces of the original Justice Society. And that's where Yolanda first appeared, was in this group. And there was like the daughter of Hawkman and Hawkgirl. I mean, the son, Hank Hall, and the this woman that was the daughter of Wonder Woman, and I think her parentage was unbeknownst to anybody, and
Mm.
Yolanda was in that, and she was fierce, and she didn't have a victimization backstory, which is interesting because
Mm.
I also feel like I've been revisiting some television for one of my classes, looking at some pilots from the '90s, and I think Infinity Inc. was like late '80s, early '90s as a comic book, and it was really interesting to me to like revisit that comic book, and also um, like pilots like Living Single with Queen Latifah, where I don't know what it is. Was it possible that no one was kind of paying attention? But like Living Single was an ensemble cast of these different African American women who were just different characters. One was really a gold digger. Another one was, a dedicated, voice of resistance and power. And the other one was a nerd. And like they all could be different, authentic people. And the same with like Infinity Inc. You had this generation trying to throw off the shackles of the older generation, and no one was stepping in and sort of demanding that you represent in a certain way. It's interesting. And then you look
Mm.
at Stargirl, and I'm with you. Like I'm like, why isn't that our main character?
Yeah, and I also all my big confession is that you kind of turned me to Stargirl because I wasn't gonna pay much attention to the show, and then I ended up watching all of it because I was curious if Wildcat, our second gen Latina Wildcat, um, was gonna have like play more of a role because she got such a kind of, I mean, a whole episode is hers, and
And
that's a lot of territory, right?
it was one of the most critically acclaimed episodes of the first season.
Oh really? I didn't know that. Yeah, I believe it.
So how did it play out?
So for me, I was disappointed because not only okay, so just within the expectations of she's not going to be our Stargirl. The Stargirl is Stargirl. She's going to be the protagonist, and she's going to have her team, her ensemble, right? And I just, the kind of the here we have Yolanda Montez, who's like, medaled boxer in the show, and like you said, like even her kind of comic book origin person is like her fierce and feisty, and she just becomes a part of the team and kind of like almost blends in or erased within that space and loses that kind of originality.
And do you feel like did you watch the episode that came after Wildcat?
I did, yes, yes.
So it felt like what we were watching a little bit was sort of episodically the Avengers assembling, right? Like we're gonna do this backstory. Now we got another one. Our Man and Doctor Midnight. We're gonna do that one, and then we're gonna bring in the Justice Society. Like now we've assembled them, right? And it's not an unsuccessful formula, but what it does is it gives kids in the candy shop like you and I the excitement of the nooks and crannies, and then it takes it away.
Hmm.
And that's I guess to be expected, and we should I don't want to say know better at our age, but it gives me the positive statement is to say it gives me my love of the nooks and crannies more to meditate on. And I guess from the question I asked you at the beginning to now, I'd say, regardless of whether it's where we've been told to live or not, it is who we are now. And so I can't help but enjoy that stuff when I see the Marvel DVD of a movie and I see there's an entire movie about what happened to Captain America's shield, and we're going to watch Agent Coulson or whoever on a quick little journey. I get excited. I
Hmm.
just do because I feel like those were the spaces that I loved as a kid reading about.
Mm. Yeah, right. That's true.
Right? That's what I'm writing about in Henchman, of those spaces.
So let me, while we're kind of on the subject, I don't want to lose sight of this idea of kind of the victimhood or trauma aspect. But before I move into that, because I think that's really our Doom Patrol conversation, do you
Yes,
remember Dark Angel when that came out?
I do. I
Would
do.
tell me like from your kind of memory, maybe foggy or less foggy, like I love that show, to be honest. Like James Cameron, I don't know like what he was reading or doing, but there was like it was a real kind of revolution, I think.
It really was, but it was from an era, right, when X Files was on, and we were in a science fiction on television sort of renaissance, right? And that is such a great. I'm so glad you brought that up because I don't want to lose sight of our main tree trunk. That's going to be. I'm going to put that on you, so I don't go off into the ether. But I will say this: that like Dark Angel was so great because it has the word dark in it, and it was dark, but it had hope. She was on. She escaped, right? She got away, and she was on the run, and she was going to try to make it, whatever that version is, right? If I'm remembering the show right. And you look at the current science fiction, and I'm not talking about things that are influenced by the pandemic because frankly nothing got shot that we're watching and consuming now that's from that. But I will say that Picard and Brave New World and Westworld, they all have this incredibly cynical nugget at the heart of it, which also, if you think about technology gone awry and science fiction, science gone awry, like it all sort of absolves the inventors of all of it. Like, you know what? The algorithm took over, and then Skynet started, and well, I couldn't do anything. None of it feels the emboldened nature in Picard is Star Trek, but the emboldened nature that Roddenberry and all of that Asimov stuff in the 60s had, which was there's caution, but there's hope. And I think that Dark Angel and X Files had a darkness to them, but you also had these people fighting for belief and fighting for truth in them. And now we're just in this like broken mirror world where everyone shrugs their shoulders and we all head to the bunker. It's not cool, not fun, not fun to watch.
Yeah. Okay. So even before Doom Patrol, now I have to just like throw out there, the boys, because, in a way it's a kind of parallel, right? With Dark Angel in that you have this kind of these decrepit superheroes, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the boys themselves, as a team, kind of like Dark Angel, Jessica Alba, really trying to kind of remove that cancer and do something positive. But in the end, it just feels so heavy.
Yes, and it comes from, the source material is from a decade where, you know, publishing wise, you were dealing with the image explosion, these sort of over steroid esque drawings of people, the the females running around in thongs, and the men wearing that. You already have this steroidal figure, and now we're going to add armor to him. So like it was this sort of blown up, run amok situation in mainstream books, right? And you would even see it kind of bleed over to DC. We're like, hey, can we have Superman have long hair for a little bit? And people were like, no. But it was all kind of happening. And so it was kind of a reaction to that. Boys was sort of a look what you've become, kind of a shot across the bow, right? The book. And you can sort of look at the superhero universe cinematically and say it's the right time for something like Boys because of how every studio has to have their tentpole superhero franchise, and so on the surface it looks like that. But I agree with what you're saying underneath, which I think is more powerful, which is it's got this darkness and this heaviness to it that just doesn't indicate light anywhere. And then I could make, as one of my crazy armchair theories this week that I've been talking to class and people about in office hours, is, you know, Latinidad, like we need our Christopher Reeves Superman first. We need that before we can start, I believe, playing around in some of these nooks and crannies and some of these meta comments on the forum, because I don't know that we've achieved excellence yet or been allowed to, in the sense of like, here's somebody who is there to uplift us and be good, and we can tell a story and it can be great, and it doesn't have to involve, Bruce Wayne's parents being killed necessarily. It can involve, somebody who's got or has conquered that trauma and is able to transcend it, right? Because Superman has a traumatic birth story as well, but by the time he finds those parents who raise him right and he heads off to Metropolis, he's our guy and we want him to do good. And he's this bright beacon. And I think we need that first before we can grab a bat and throw some nails in it and go out destroying, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so to just kind of wrap up at least my thought on the Boys Amazon Prime series, here we are, the kind of that, like you were saying, the kind of that sarcastic, ironic, and then kind of potty mouth writing from a particular era of comics that was pushing against the kind of superhero stuff that we'd had up for so long. But it gives so much narrative, like real estate to this, and so little to these kind of moments where we can breathe and feel light, that it seems to me that it just feeds into, I mean, Homelander's a repugnant, repulsive, like, person, and of course he's supposed to embody a lot of the things that we see and that our communities are experiencing today. But the fact of the matter is, he's the one who gets all the real estate.
I know he does. And I've, with other friends, other writer friends, we've always talked about the possible pathos and possible tragedy that you could overcome if you were to do, Warner Brothers would never do it. Maybe they've done an Elseworlds of it, but the idea of, Superman from the 50s, 40s, Captain America from the 40s, let's the Japs, like that person living long enough to have to deal with what they did when they thought it was right is a very compelling emotional story. But that's not what we're getting with Homelander, right? We're not getting the regret and shame of what I've done and how do I fix it? How do I become someone that says, well, I can't go back, but I can go forward? Like we're not waiting for that moment in that narrative with that character, correct? And to me, that's interesting, but they're not going to do that, I don't think.
Yeah, no.
And so that's the tragedy, right? And like the tragedy of it is, I think people want that story. I don't know if you've seen online, but I got sent to me at least 3 times this week, which is a lot, from different people. This little video of Joe Biden giving his flag pin to a little boy. And it's a little boy who just says like, oh, what is that? And the boy's mother, African-American kid, the boy's mother does what any mother would do, which is like, oh, that's his pin. He has to wear it. Like you can't ask for that, right? To the kid, right? Afraid the child's going to want it. And then there's going to be awkwardness. And Biden is reading this expertly, regardless of what you think of him. And he's like, oh, this is my flag. Do you want it? And he puts it on the kid. And so like, why am I getting sent that video? Because it had nothing to do with anything other than hope. It had nothing to do with other than one person talking to another person and making them feel okay for a second. And it just flashed back to all those cool moments with Christopher Reeve as Superman, where you're like, right, we can believe in something. That's awesome. Let's believe in that. And we're missing that. And I think that's the space I'm trying to inhabit when I'm trying to figure out what is our great next epic.
Yeah.
Because we need that.
Yeah, so oh man, I got so much going on here right now. So end of Stargirl, after I binged it,
Yeah.
she's atop this of the water tower for is it Blue Valley, the town,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and there's a American flag and all that stuff. And what a difference it would have made if she had been there with her like ensemble team, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, with that kind of hope that you were talking about. But so the boys, no Latinos, Latinas, Latinxes anywhere to be seen on the streets.
No.
Urban US, none of us. So it's not surprising that you and I and others are like so hungry for those nooks and crannies whenever we get them.
Yes.
Um, and then so taking this idea of when we do finally get some screen time and Diane Guerrero as Jane, and I'm like all over the place in my brain on this because of how we have a Latina actor who's very like down and very vocal about her activism. We've seen her in other spaces like Orange is the New Black, and she's re-inhabiting a white character. But then there's all sorts of other things that are going on.
Yeah. And and she was also in Superior Donuts, so I got to work
Oh
with her.
yes,
And she is all those things. And you know, you look at Doom Patrol and you look at that darkness, right? That's some dark stuff, right? And it's absurd, and it's from Grant Morrison's mind, and it's from that same era, right? The same sort of era as Boys. And there's a sense of community underneath that show that, by no means do I think it's perfect, but there's a sense of community underneath that show, and there's a sense of acceptance underneath that show that I just adore. And these aren't concepts that these showrunners invented, so I don't want to. I want to always give credit, like this idea of a street, of a transgender street that exists where people can go hide, and that it's got a name, Danny the Street. That's all from Grant Morrison, but I love what they've done with it, and I love the episodes that were about it, and and learning about Larry, and his past, and everyone's got these pasts, but they're all trying to overcome them. And I think that's so much better than just accepting those pasts as an explanation for why I'm violent or why I need to act out or lash out. Like they're really trying to the best that they can, and they've got this weirdo antagonist in Timothy Dalton, who's there as their benefactor, but also the person that you kind of get the hand that he made them these people because he was looking for ways to keep his daughter okay or him okay. And you're like, that seems self serving, but it's all conflicted. It's all human. And I really, I feel like her performance is really special. And when you think about her working opposite a robot head that can't emote and a guy who's bandaged up all the time, and then, Cyborg's got half his head in a mask, like just acting wise, she's doing some amazing stuff. And it's just really awesome, and a shame not more people know about it because of the platform it's on.
yeah, it's interesting too, and maybe Peter, you can speak to this as a writer and creator of shows, but it's interesting that she doesn't. All the other characters in this kind of ragtag team get a backstory almost immediately as we're kind of pushing through that first season. And she really doesn't get much of anything till the second season, but then she gets it in spades, right?
Yeah. And she gets it in a way that we start to understand the hierarchy of what's going on in the underground, and this battle to who's the lead persona. And, I feel like the second season is about her in a way. And it's so cool. And, you know, she is able to be herself, and we're not asking her to be performative as a Latina,
Hmm.
other than to being Diane. Be Diane. Be yourself. Those voices, those things, like, it would be so interesting to me if we could ever talk to like the producers and writers, because I wonder, there's moments in this second season where I feel like for the sake of the story she has to be walled off and push away, but you can see on her face this desire to either not do that or regret that I did it again. Like I told Robot Man, like, no, I'm not. But you can see these moments where she's in struggle, and I just think it's really compelling, and the kind of work that I know she does all the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, back to our point about the nooks, crannies, and now I would say the subterranean. And here we have in season two, the subterranean nooks, the crannies, literally like kind of
Yeah,
taking the dominant, right? Becoming the dominant.
yeah, and that episode where you've been dealing with Dorothy, the daughter of Timothy Dalton, of Chief, and
Niles, yeah. Hmm.
then that episode in the middle of the season where, baby girl, who I've seen in season one, sort of comes out, right? Because what's needed in the moment, both narratively and character wise, how are we going to deal with this girl now that wants to grow up? And like, she's immortal and she wants to grow up. She's learned just enough from Rita. I want all these things. And just that episode is really great too. And it kind of speaks to the talent of the female characters and also the writing that allows them to have those sort of depths. And I think with Rita's backstory, speaking of victims and old Hollywood casting couch stuff, what's interesting to me about narratively as a writer, what they're doing with Rita is they're they're treating the audience very smart. They're not talking down to the audience, and so they aren't feeling compelled to give you the blow by blow of like what happened to Rita and also what happened to Rita's mom. It's flashes and it's quick, and then we're back in the present dealing with the present day problem. And I like that respect for the audience and that handling of those kind of issues because they're there, and the first time she loses control when she in the first season, it's all there, but it doesn't have to be. We're not watching the whining and dining of the studio head and her, and we're not watching the compromises. There's this wonderful moment where the flashback to Rita is very excited that this person from the studio is coming over. I'm going to dance for him. I'm going to do this for them. And then she says, "You have other talents." And then you kind of quickly flash to the mom being taken advantage of. And it's kind of like it leaves this space for like, what was the mom meaning when she said other talents? Because that was a girl. Was the mom about to pimp her out as a girl? Or was she talking about acting? Because I don't know if the child Rita was saying acting. Was she talking about dancing and singing? Like it leaves it a lot for you to fill in. And I like that.
Yeah, on Rita, just me too. I thought it was the way the show doesn't dumb down to an audience that will understand the that whiteness. First of all, that we're habituated to kind of whiteness. It's just every day. It's the imaginary that's kind of constructed by the televisual machine and everything else, but it becomes visible only when it's monstrous. And Rita's like perfectly done for that, right?
Perfectly. It's also so interesting to me, and again, I go back to Grant Morrison, but it might also be these writers' takes on these characters. But is there a more queer superhero show than this one? Like not just in character makeup, but choices in narrative. Like Rita being a female screen star from a certain era, you know, and with Diane's underground and things of identity and coming out, and like it just seems like it permeates so much of the show,
Hmm.
and I love it because it doesn't announce itself. It
Hmm.
is, which kind of goes back to the nooks and crannies and what we get because you know in Mill Valley in Stargirl's hometown, I guess I'm projecting now, but I would say that if somebody were to say, well, what if they all meet at the taco shop, or what if they all meet at you know, um, the vinyl record store that's owned by this cool hip Latin dude. I wonder if somebody would say, well, it's Mill Valley. Would we have to explain why they're there? And to which you and I would always go, no, they're there. Why not just have them there?
Hmm.
We don't need to explain ourselves, or we shouldn't feel a need to explain ourselves.
Yeah, let me just one comment too about something you said about Diane's acting. And of course, you know her well and know kind of how extraordinary she is as an actor. But my first reaction, and I'll be honest, when I saw Jane and her as Jane, as a kind of either kind of a crazed goth or as a kind of baby doll, was business as usual. But then I think you really put your finger on this, which is she's so good at what she does that she doesn't allow you to go into that kind of caricature.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of um, nothing specific, but this sort of feeling in my head of like, what are you looking at? Like over and over again. Like, yeah, yeah. Uh, like in the most egregious and basic way, like, I got yoga pants on, but what are you looking at? I've got a baby girl voice and I'm a grown woman. What does that make you think of, jerk?
Hmm.
Like there's this feeling underneath that performance, which is because of her being, who she is, that's just like, no, I'm not going to allow you. There's no free passes here, buddy. There's no free passes at the look, at the gaze. There's no free passes. Even when Cliff Steele desperately just wants to hug her and like wants to hug her for no other reason than like, I want to feel human for a second. And you just went through something. She doesn't want that either. Like there's this guardedness to her that doesn't speak to brittleness, but it speaks to it's mine to give away, not yours.
Yeah, so I guess as we wrap this up, we can say, we want more Diane Guerrero, right?
Do we want more Diane? We want more Yolanda. We want
Hmm.
to not feel that we need to explain ourselves. And I think a lot of times it's easier to put us in the side of the team photo, right? Because then you don't have to answer those questions. But I feel like we're at a point in the world where we could answer them just by moving someone into the center of the team photo. That's all we
Hmm.
need to do.
Yeah. So maybe Netflix, the next round should, we need to push Daredevil aside and give Night Nurse Claire Temple Rosario Dawson,
Yes,
right?
why not? Why not? Why not? And why not make, you know, Blue Beetle? Like, where is
Mhm.
Blue Beetle? Mired in development hell. But come on. Kid finds a scarab. Scarab talks to him. He wants to finish high school. I mean, it's DC's Spider Man. And by the way, he existed for so many years that Marvel went ahead and made Miles Morales. So, like, now is it too late for Blue Beetle? I don't even know. But it was
Mm.
like it was Mexican Spider Man before they had Latino Spider Man, and you're like, you guys, stop being asleep on that.
All right, we've got a lot of work to do, Peter, and I think I loved sharing my journey with you here in superheroes and TV spaces and other spaces.
Too. Me too. I can't wait for the next one. We'll have to pick another really cool story or show to kick us off because once we're off, and I love it.